Hello everyone. So I'm making this video to talk about the idea of responsibility. So yesterday I was talking with a friend of mine and we were discussing the concept of responsibility, and it was kind of interesting because I was trying to think, like, is it a story? So is responsibility just a story that we build in our mind? So again, the usual thing, so the image in reality, and then we compare reality with the image in reality, and then we judge reality based on image in reality. So is responsibility just a story, just something we make up in our minds? Or is it something that actually exists? So it was kind of interesting because just, let's say, throwing away completely the idea, the concept of responsibility, it seems a little bit extreme. So is it a pure story, something that you can just drop and just argue? I don't know. So, but let's see. Let's go into the conversation. I will try to sum up the key points, and let's see where we go. So, responsibility. So let's see. Responsibility. Well, first of all, there is an element of consequence in responsibility. So the consequence do matter. So it's like, let's say you sign a contract that you are going to do something, and maybe you get paid, or but still you make an agreement, you agree to something. Well, you have a responsibility to the extent that there are consequences. So responsibility, I assume, I didn't do the research, but I assume it comes at least from Italian, from Latin, to respond. Responsibility, it's like who is going to respond. So let's say something, there is a group of people, and something goes wrong, and who is going to respond? Let's say in the old times, maybe the king appoints a group of people to do a certain task, which could be to raise tax, or could be to manage the army. Let's say someone more important, let's say the king, appoints a group of people, so more than one person, to do something. So the question is, if something goes wrong, who is going to respond to the king? So maybe it's a specific general, maybe it's all the generals, maybe it's the generals and certain key people. It's complicated. It depends on a lot of things. Yeah, it's like maybe the simple soldier that only takes orders from the generals is not really going to have to respond to the king. The king is not going to punish him in case he fails. But the general, probably yes. But again, it depends, because the general that say, this is very difficult war, we will try, but no guarantees, is a different situation than the one that say, for sure we are going to win, don't worry. So it's not black and white, this idea of responsibility, but it kind of come, I believe, from the word to respond, responsibility, to respond, to respond to a higher authority. So responsibility is who is going to respond. Of course, sometimes you don't have to respond. Let's say you're just a simple soldier, or let's say, for example, someone is driving a car, and there is an accident because everyone is drunk. Now, who is going to respond? Well, the driver that is drunk will have to respond, but the passenger that is drunk, probably not. Even if they are both drunk, the passenger is drunk, the driver is drunk, but most likely only the driver will have to respond for the crime or the liability, or to compensate the victim, whatever it is. So responsibility is who is going to respond. So again, clearly there is an element of consequence. So the fact that someone has dropped the stories, has dropped the mental conditionings, etc., it doesn't mean that you are free, as in absolutely free to do whatever you want. It means that you're going for direct preferences. So a direct preference is something that you just desire to do directly. So let's say I prefer, I want chocolate ice cream. There is no story behind. If I ask the question why, there is no answer. It's just my preference. So it's kind of an ultimate preference. In a sense, it's like a fundamental preference. There is no story behind. But then if I say I really want to help this person, now it could be out of true, genuine preference, that it just makes me feel good to help this person, then there is no story. It's a direct preference. Or it could be that there is a story. I am the kind of guy that helps people and that makes me better than everyone else, blah, 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 blah. Then it's a story. So I help the person because it validates my story. So sometimes the same action, actually very often, the same action can have two completely different motivations. So one motivation is a direct preference, one is just fulfilling a story. And to do that, we have to ask the question why. Why are we doing it? If we can easily answer the question why with words like should, or should be, or if I do this, then I will be that, or those kind of words, then it's almost certainly a story. Usually, if we can explain it, the idea is to ask why, and then at some point we may find a story, then the motivation is a story. If we cannot find a story, if it's just I want to, there is no reason, I want chocolate ice cream, there is no reason, I just want chocolate ice cream, then it's a direct preference. So in the case of responsibility, clearly there is an element of consequence. So there are consequences. We do things, there are consequences. Can I go out and get some chocolate ice cream from a shop and not pay? It's my preference to get chocolate ice cream. I like chocolate ice cream, there is no story. I want the chocolate ice cream, I don't have money, or I don't want to pay. Maybe it's also my preference not to pay. I go into the shop, I take the chocolate, I eat the chocolate, I don't pay. Well, probably they will call the police, and maybe I will have to go to jail or to pay a fine or something. But something will happen. So it's not that dropping stories and dropping mental conditioning remove the consequences. So the first element is the consequences. Is there a consequence? So responsibility intended in a very, very practical way as a consequence. This would be a first case, but it's the simplest and the least interesting, but of course we have to look at it. So responsibility intended as consequence. Then let's see, is there something else? So my friend was talking, for example, about some idea of maybe guilt. So he will feel guilty in certain situations. So let's look at an example where there are no consequences to you not doing a certain thing, but you may feel like you have a responsibility. So I was making an example with him. So let's say that, for example, someone lends you money. Someone lends you, let's say, $1 million. So someone lends you $1 million, and they are not getting anything out of it. So they just want to help. So there is no interest rate. You call the guy, you say, look, I really need $1 million. Can you please help me? And the guy says, sure, give me your bank account, and immediately send $1 million. No discussion, nothing. So this is pure help. There is nothing. There is, again, no interest rate, no terms, no discussion, nothing. Just purely desire to help. Now, maybe this comes from a story or not from the other guy, but to some extent, I think this should be irrelevant for the person that receives the money. It doesn't really matter if the person who is giving did it out of pure preference or because of a story. The person still tried to be helpful. The person still did his best to help by lending you the money. And let's say that, for example, this was the example we made. Let's say that, for example, because maybe you need to provide, which is actually very common, you have to provide supporting documentation for the bank. So the bank is not going to just transfer the money. They want to see a piece of paper which explains why the money is being transferred. They need supporting documentation in order to make it. For large amounts, the bank will usually ask for supporting documentation. So let's say that out of convenience, the guy said, you know what, let's put 10 years. So the lender, the friend that wants to help, writes, let's put 10 years. But again, there is no consideration, there is no counterparty. Sorry, there is nothing that is given in exchange. It's not that there is a negotiation like, okay, 10 years because this is the interest rate, or because you give me this collateral, this guarantee. It's just like, well, we have to put a date, so let's put a date which is easy for you. Let's put 10 years. And that's it. No, it's just, he just wants to do you a favor. But the bank requests the document, so he could just have sent the money without any document. He just truly wants to help. But the bank requires a document. So in the document, someone writes 10 years. I mean, the lender, because he thinks it's a long time, 10 years, we will see in 10 years. So the friend, the lender, writes 10 years. But then let's say after a year, let's say that now let's say you are the receiver, you get the million, you invest it successfully, now you have tens of millions, you're doing very, very well. And that other person, unfortunately, he went through very bad times and he lost almost everything, but you still owe him the million. So he comes to you and he say, hey, can you give me back the million because I really need it? Now you could say, well, the contract says 10 years. So now you're looking in terms of consequence, like you don't have to. There is no real consequence if you do not give the money back, because you could argue that the contract says 10 years. You could say, well, as we agreed, I will give you back the money in 10 years. But the thing is, this was not really an agreement where each party was benefiting. It's not that it was like, for example, he lend you the money for 10 years, but there is an interest rate, and so there is a deadline. And then you could say, well, you lend me the money, but because you got the interest rate, so now you wait 10 years as agreed. In that case, there is no interest rate. The guy just wanted to do you a favor. The 10 years were not negotiated. It was just, okay, let's put 10 years because the bank needs some document. So what will I do? So in my case, I have dropped the condition mind. So I don't have stories. So I just look into myself. So I'm talking from direct experience. I'm not making up theories. I'm just looking into myself, what I will do in this case. Well, first of all, I will not call it a sense of responsibility. I will call it a sense of gratitude. I will say, well, this person helped me when I needed it. And he didn't ask for anything in return. This was not a negotiation, an agreement where he lent me the money and I give him something else, like interest or something. No, it was purely for helping. So the guy genuinely wanted to help me. That's it. There was no other motive, no other purpose in this loan. So rather than use the word responsibility, I will use the word gratefulness. So in that case, I will be grateful to him because he helped me without asking for anything in exchange. This is very important, because if there was something asked in exchange, then it will be a business deal. In a business deal, the responsibility is mostly about the consequences, which also include potentially reputational damage, both with the other person. So, I mean, at the end, if you don't honor your agreements, it produces reputational damage. Whether it's one-to-one or in front of many people, still, it is reputational damage. So it's important. I mean, I guess in general, reputation is a good thing to have. You don't want to throw it away. And to some extent, if people believe that in general you hold your end of a bargain, they will make deals with you. If they believe you never hold your end of the bargain, they will just stop making deals with you, which is not good for you. So there is the consequences, which could be legal consequences, like, or reputational consequence, or any kind of consequence. Now, when it's a business deal, you look at the consequences, because there was a fair exchange. So it's like you give something, the other person gives something. It's a fair exchange. So it is ruled, I will say, by consequences, and which include reputational damage. But in this case, there is no consequence, because let's say the guy wrote 10 years in the contract, but he truly wants to do you a favor. So there is no consequence. You could just say, well, let's stick to the terms of the contract. Now, yes, some people may say you're an asshole because the guy did you a favor. So there is a small component of consequence also. But more than anything else, I would say this will be about gratefulness. So I will feel grateful that the person has helped me without asking for anything in exchange. So I will say, of course, I will return you the money. Now you need it, and I don't need it. So I will return it. Maybe I will give him more than what he asked, because I'm grateful. So this will be a direct preference. I will feel very bad. So it will be strongly against my preference not to help back someone that has helped me. So someone that kind of trusted me, believed in me, genuinely wanted to help without asking for anything in exchange. I will feel bad to kind of betray his trust. So I will help out of gratefulness. So the word is not responsibility, it's gratefulness. It will purely be gratefulness if I can help him. Now, there may be situations where actually I could also decide not to return the money. Even in the case where the guy has been incredibly generous and just wanted to help. Now let's see what could be this example. So again, let's say the guy lends me $1 million, the contract says 10 years. I know that there is no exchange. It was done purely out of desire to help. So I am very grateful, of course, but let's say that I've lost everything except that money and I really need it, like to pay rent, to eat, to basically survive, and maybe I also have to take care of my family or blah, 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 whatever. And maybe the other guy has plenty of money, he just wants the money back. So I say, look, I'm sorry, I'm very grateful that you lent me the money when I needed it, but unfortunately I still need it. So I need it to survive. And it's kind of, let's say my preference is to survive. There is no matter of honor or whatever. Those are clearly just stories about identity. So I will just say, look, maybe I can give you back half. I can give you now half, and I will do my best over the coming years to give you the remaining. But I may very well decide not to give the full amount if I truly need it. And especially if I feel that he doesn't need it. So let's say he has now hundreds of millions, and all I have is that million that he lent me, and I need it to feed my family. I will not return it. I may return half, and I may, of course, ensure him that I'm very grateful that he helped me, and I will return the rest whenever I can. Of course, I will not have an antagonistic attitude. I will clearly state that I want to return it because I'm grateful. I just cannot. So again, the preference can also mix, because yes, there is the preference to be grateful and return the money, but there is also the preference to survive, the preference to be able to pay rent and not be in the street. Especially if the other person is doing well, if the other person doesn't need the money, he just wants it. Then I could just say, look, I'm sorry, I cannot return the full amount. I will return you, let's say, half, and I will try to return the other half as soon as I can, and maybe I will give you a little bit more to show that I'm grateful. So now we don't really have responsibility. So far, responsibility seems to be a story. What we have is consequences, could be legal consequences, could be reputational consequences. So we consider the consequences, usually when a proper deal has been made. So someone gives something, but the other person gives something in exchange. It's a real deal. There is a real exchange. Then usually this will be about reputation, about consequences, which include also reputation, but not only legal consequences and reputation. Then we have the case where it was not an exchange. The person just truly wanted to help. So then, and you may very well have no obligation to return the money. Let's say the contract says 10 years. I mean, you probably have to return it for some reputational element, but maybe you can return it in 10 years as per the contract and kind of be an asshole and say, well, yeah, I know that you wanted to help, but the contract says 10 years, so you wait 10 years. And maybe the person really needs the money and you don't. Now, I wouldn't do that, and it doesn't matter what the contract say. I will say, well, I'm grateful because here there is no exchange. I'm just grateful that you lend me the money when I needed it. Now you need, I will immediately return it to you, and plus maybe more. I will lend you more if you need more. So then we have gratefulness. So for now it looks like there is no such thing as responsibility, as something like true thing, whatever that means. It's more like a story. But let's look again. So he was giving me some example about guilt and responsibility in a third scenario that we're going to look at. So not the one where there is an exchange and there may be consequences, and not the one where there is pure gratefulness. So you return the money because you're grateful. Now the third example, he was giving me the example of a marriage. So let's say some women, let's say, marries me, and she kind of invests her entire life in this marriage. Like for her, it's like everything. It's a big deal. So this is not about money. I mean, it's maybe also money, but it's money. It's identity. It's her time. It's her life. It's like she invests everything into this marriage. And maybe during the marriage, as every marriage, you kind of have to promise that it's forever. Now, of course, everyone knows that divorce exists, but at the end of the day, in the marriage, you actually promise that it's forever. It's also true that you are promising something that you know that it potentially is impossible to hold. I mean, well, you may promise to remain married forever, but you cannot promise, let's say, to love forever because it's something outside of your control. Plus, everyone knows that divorce exists because 50% of marriages end up in divorce. So even the girl, when she gets married, she knows that divorce exists and is a possibility. Now, she may not want to admit it to herself, but she knows. So this is an important part. So yes, a promise is made, but situations change. Certain things are outside of your control. So yes, maybe so I don't know exactly what technically the marriage vow says, if it says, I promise to love you forever, or I promise to remain married forever. So are you supposed to not divorce even if you don't love the person anymore? Or, I mean, I don't know. But I guess it doesn't really matter. It's about expectation. So clearly there is an expectation on one side that there is not going to be a divorce, because that's the implied assumption of a marriage. So there is the idea that there is going to be no divorce when there is a marriage. But then there is also the fact that everyone knows the statistics and know that there are many divorces, and 50% of marriage end up in divorce. So it's kind of mixed here in terms of expectation. Just like at the end of the day, even when someone promises you something, you know that very often promises are not maintained. This is common. So I will say you're a fool if you give it 100% probability just because someone promised you something. There is a very high chance, I mean, there is some chance that it's not going to happen. And again, it really depends. But looking more into this case, however, some other points appear. And I think the most interesting point that came out during this conversation with my friend is the idea of selfishness. Because, usually there is the promise, but there are also implicit promises. So, for example, someone say, let's get married and we should never divorce because it's a promise to never divorce. But then there is an implied promise also that there will be love, that the love will not stop. There is an implicit promise that both will care about the other. There is an implicit promise that maybe the situation will not change too much. If the situation changed completely, that could change the assumptions. So when there is a promise, there are also assumptions related to that promise, which are very relevant. It's not just what is said, it's also what is implied. So it's not just the words of the promise, it's also the implications of the promise. Let's get married and never divorce, but it probably implies we should, assuming that we will love each other forever, assuming that we will take care of each other forever. So there is an assumption behind this promise. So then if the assumption disappears, then does the promise disappear or not? We don't know. It depends on the situation, of course. But let's look more specifically, because my friend was mentioning the idea of guilt. So as an important element, the idea of guilt as a relevant factor. So then I was thinking about it, and I was imagining two scenarios. So I was imagining one scenario where, let's say, for example, you are unhappy in the marriage, and the other person say, well, but I don't care because we got married. You promised me to remain married to me. But then once you sense some selfishness, then it's the other person think it's about them. So let's say the wife think it's about her. So she's like, well, I don't care that you feel miserable all the time with me because we got married. You promised me that we will stay married. And then you're like, well, but if you don't care about me, so if you're being selfish, you don't care about the fact that I'm miserable, then why will I stay married to you? So I have no reason, because it's like, yes, of course, there was the promise of the marriage, but then there was also the assumption or a kind of implied promise that the other person will care, that there will be love. But if you tell the other person, look, I'm miserable in this marriage, I want to divorce, and the other person say, well, I don't care, you have to stay married because that's what we agreed, I don't care that you're miserable, then effectively the other person doesn't care about you. So then why would you care about them? They kind of become selfish. And if the other person becomes selfish, then why wouldn't you be selfish also? So then I don't really see room for guilt. It seems more like a story that maybe you believe you are the kind of guy that does this, or that you should do this, or blah, blah, blah. Seems like a story because after all, if the person decides to behave in a selfish way, then why wouldn't you also behave in a selfish way? And then it's about power. It's whoever can pull it off. So you will try to divorce and she will try to prevent the divorce and the judge will decide. But you would do your best to get the divorce because at this point you have seen that she's selfish. So she doesn't want it. You told her that you're miserable and she doesn't care. So why will you stay married? Because the idea of caring is also an implied promise. You guys both agree to get married, but there is also an implicit agreement that you should care about each other. And if you tell the other person that you're miserable and she say, I don't care, we stay married, then she's being selfish. So then you have no reason to maintain that promise. Why would you? Because there is no, well, of course the consequences matter, so you may lose money in the divorce, etc. But why would you be grateful? I mean, you're grateful when someone does something truly for you. So the gratefulness falls if the other person becomes selfish. But there is another case. Let's say the other person is not selfish in any way. You tell the other person, look, I'm miserable in this marriage. And the other person say, I will do whatever I can to make you happy. Now, this looks something very, very generous, even if it doesn't really have to be, because maybe it's about, I will do whatever I can to make you happy as long as we stay married. So there will still be a little bit of exchange. But let's say this person say, I just want to do everything to make you happy. I will go out of my way because what makes me happy is to make you happy, let's say. Well, in this case, of course, there would be some gratefulness, but it has to be real. So it's like, maybe, I don't know, maybe there are many issues. So maybe, let's use an extreme example. Maybe this guy loves another woman by now. And so the wife could say, well, I want what's best for you, so bring her home. If she say, no, 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 this is unacceptable, then again, she's being selfish. And I'm not saying she's wrong or I'm not saying she's right or she's wrong, yeah? And I'm not saying that selfish is bad. I'm saying that selfishness doesn't generate in the other person the feeling, I think, of gratefulness. So if someone completely get out of their way to do something for you, it generates gratefulness. And so it will be my preference to do what I can to help them because I'm grateful. It's a direct preference, it's not a story. But as soon as there is some selfishness, it's more like a business deal. It's kind of a deal, so it's about consequences, and really that's it, either legal or reputation. As soon as some selfishness enters in the equation, even if the wife say, yeah, I just want to do absolutely everything to make you happy, like if you want to have 10 girlfriends and if you want to smoke all day in the house and drink all the time and always watch football super loud and I cannot sleep and absolutely everything. Why is she agreeing to that? Because she truly, truly, truly care about you and love you so much that all she cares is your happiness? Or because she desperately wants to stay married and so she's willing to compromise on everything just to stay married? Because even that will be an element of selfishness. Not that there is anything wrong with selfishness. Actually, it's usually much better to be selfish. Because when you're selfish, at least you will not build resentment. Ideally, relationships should be win-win. So both are selfish, but both benefit. So let's say I genuinely love to take care of someone, and they genuinely love to take care of me. That's as selfish as it gets. I'm doing because I like to do it. She's doing it because she likes to do it. It's as selfish as it gets. Usually, not being selfish is always a story. Because if you're not being selfish, you are basically doing something you don't want. You are telling yourself a story that you have to do something you don't want, and then eventually you will feel resentment because you will, why did I do that thing I don't want? You expect something in return eventually. I did this for this person. They are not returning it. So usually when you do something that is not selfish, either it's because of a story, so because I'm the kind of guy that blah, 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 or because I should blah, 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 blah. So either it's a story or there is an expectation of return. And both are not great. So if it's a story, you just get more and more, your reality and your view of the world gets more and more distorted. If it's a story, ideally you should try to drop the story. And if there is an expectation of return, then it's basically a business deal. It's an implicit business deal. And you will feel resentment if the other person doesn't provide, let's say, what you expected. If the expectation is not met, then you will feel resentment at the other person, which is not great also. So ideally, it's much, much better, I will argue, to always be selfish. And the idea that we should not be selfish is a story. So even if someone is generous, to some extent, they are selfish because they do it because they like to do it. If I give money to a charity, I genuinely like to do it. I genuinely like the idea that it's helping people. There is no story, and I don't expect anything in return. I do it in a completely selfish way. I do it because I like to do it. If I didn't like to do it, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't force myself to do it. Why? Because of a story? Why? It's usually much, much better to be selfish than not to be. When you are selfish, there is less chance that there is a story, and there is less chance there is resentment. When you are not selfish or generous, it's usually either a story or you expect something in return, which if it doesn't happen, you will feel resentment. So again, you have to kind of understand what is the motivation of the person who wants to stay married at all costs. Maybe it's just that they just want to stay married. It's like, it's about their identity. It's about, maybe they think it's a big reputational issue. They don't want to appear divorced. Maybe they feel it's bad to be divorced, whatever. Now, again, should you completely ignore the situation of the other person? I will say no, because of course you may still care about them and you may still empathize with them. You may still, I mean, at the end you can imagine how they feel, and the imagined feeling is a little bit like feeling the feeling. But then the motivation is important because I am me and you guys are you, and there are also boundaries. So the thing is, you cannot just be generous, let's say, or care about someone. Well, you could potentially, like maybe you could care about your children even if they don't care about you, I would say. But in general, between adults, you cannot really care about someone if they don't care about you, because then it's like pure exploitation. It just goes one way, and eventually you will get tired of it. So you will even stop caring. So in general, it's like it's a difficult question, and I'm not saying that there is a black and white answer, and I'm not trying also to find the exact answer. I'm trying to kind of exclude things that are obviously wrong. So I mean, sure, you can care. It's a direct reference to care. But again, usually the degree to which you care depends also on if the other person cares. So if the other person really doesn't care, even if it's your child, maybe then once he reaches 18, then you also don't care. If that child doesn't care about you at all, you may still care for him because he has nobody else probably. So you may still care for him until he's 18, but then you may just stop caring if he doesn't care for you, if he's just completely selfish. It depends. I mean, I don't know, to be honest. But I still think that responsibility is just a story. So the option we are seeing now is, the first one is consequences, legal consequences and reputation. So you do it for the consequence. It's not that because you have dropped the stories that you're immune from consequences. Consequences still exist and still matter. So the first one is consequences. The second one is gratefulness. Now this is, so known as our story, yes? So there are no stories for now. So the first case is just consequences. The second case is gratefulness. Out of the feeling of gratefulness, you feel like, not an obligation, but you feel like you want to help when you can. Someone helped you when they could, you want to help when you can. It's just about the feeling of gratefulness. There is no guilt. There is no feeling of responsibility, which would be stories, most likely, I guess. Just gratefulness. And I think those are the two main moving parts. So when you look at the situation, I mean, I'm describing from the perspective of someone who doesn't have stories. Of course, if someone has stories, there would be ideas like responsibility, or you have to, or honor, or obligation, or guilt. But those are generated by stories. If you remove the stories, including responsibility, which is clearly a story, I would say at this point, we have first the consequences, so which are related to also the power someone has. So the more power you have, the less the consequences affect you, and the less power you have, the more the consequences affect you. That's why they say, if you truly want to know someone, give them power, because now they can become their true self, whatever that means, but because they have to worry less about consequences. Now they may still act based on stories, so their actions may still be distorted based on stories and not direct preferences, but at least they will consider the consequences less because they have more power. So one is the consequences, and it's more like a business deal, and it's about power. The other one is about the gratefulness. So there is no consequence. It's not about power. Let's say you have all the power. There is zero consequence. But still, that person helped you, asking for nothing in exchange. I will feel grateful. And if I can help him back, I would. If he asks the money after a week, even if he say I can wait 10 years, if I can give him the money, I could. Not out of obligation, not out of responsibility, out of gratefulness. And the gratefulness depends how much you perceive the person did it purely to help you versus for a selfish motive. And again, not that there is anything wrong with being selfish. It's great to be selfish. It's much better to be selfish and honest to yourself than be generous based on stories or distortions or whatever. So the more it appears like a business deal, that there is something given for something else, that there is an element of selfishness. So again, let's look at the example of the marriage. So yes, you guys got married and you promised to each other eternal love and to never divorce, but then you are miserable in the marriage. And then you say to the other person, well, I'm miserable in this marriage, I want to divorce. And if the other person say, yeah, but I don't care because you promised me. Of course, the consequence still exists, legal consequence, reputational consequence, of course. But the gratefulness kind of drops. It's like, I mean, if you don't divorce, it's just because you cannot. You wish you could, but you cannot. You just don't do it because you cannot in that specific case. Because if the other person say, I don't care that you're miserable, then she's just being selfish. She only cares about herself. And as soon as you notice that she only cares about herself, then the feeling of gratefulness goes away. And then you also decide to care about yourself only. You say, well, then I only care about myself. And then you try to divorce, and maybe you succeed, maybe you fail, maybe you have to pay a lot of money, maybe not. But then this becomes about power and strategy and whatever. So, however, if the wife say, look, I love you so much, whatever is best for you, then maybe you may say, oh my God, she loves me so much. Maybe at this point you truly want to stay married. But it depends again, because then you have to understand why you were feeling miserable. Maybe because you felt she didn't care, and by saying this, then you realize she does care. Maybe she say, look, if you want, I sign the divorce paper now, and I don't want anything. I just want what's best for you. Then maybe you're like, wow, she truly loves me. She truly cares. And maybe you don't want to divorce at that point. Or maybe you still want, because it's like, yeah, but I don't love you anymore. There is nothing I can do. I love this other person. And so, it will depend. Maybe she'll say, okay, then fine, I want what's best for you. And then it's up to you. Maybe you say, well, actually, maybe she's the one that cares about me and the other doesn't. but you will still decide freely. You will weigh consequences, you will weigh gratefulness, and I think that's it really. Because the other things, they feel they are just stories. Responsibility, guilt comes from stories. Responsibility is a story. You imagine yourself being responsible of whatever. So responsibility is a story. Guilt is the consequence of a story. I don't know what the other things could be, but I would argue responsibility is just a story. There is nothing but a story when it comes to responsibility. When we have to respond in a specific way, when we have to do a specific action, it's either because of the consequences, and those are not preferences, are real things, the consequences, they do really happen, or it's out of gratefulness. If there is no consequences, then it will be just out of gratefulness, which is a feeling, it's a preference. It's like if someone truly cares about you, truly wanted to help you, you feel grateful and you want to do something for them. It's just a direct preference. There is no story. You just like to do it. Just like you like to eat chocolate ice cream, you like to kind of care, to help, to give something to the person you feel grateful towards, the people that they themselves help you, expecting nothing in exchange, just because they care. You kind of want to do the same back. But there is no story, it's just something that makes you feel good. It's a direct preference. So, in conclusion, the idea of responsibility is just a story. But it doesn't mean that you can behave in a completely irresponsible way either. There are consequences, and you could potentially have some preference for being grateful towards certain people.